You don't like Donald Trump, do you?
I don't respect the manner in which he has carried out the presidency.
Okay. You despise Donald Trump, don't you?
Mueller
You just can't bring yourself to say that he didn't violate the law?
no.
Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
I was
mean,
appointed.
that determined, isn't it a court of final jurisdiction decides what's constitutional and not? In fact, aren't most acts of Congress presumed to be constitutional?
They are presumed, but they're not always constitutional. And no, of course, I was not on the Supreme Court. And I can tell you, Senator, look, we really wrestled over this decision. I personally wrestled over this decision. And it was not one that I took lightly at all. But it was because I took my responsibility seriously as acting Attorney General.
I believe you believe what you're saying.
Yes, I do.
I'm just trying to understand, this is likely to come up in the future.
Well,
at what point does an executive order or statute become unconstitutional? When I think it's unconstitutional, or you think it's unconstitutional, or a court of final jurisdiction says it's unconstitutional?
That line says everything. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court? That's the turning point, and a big reason why John Kennedy stands out. What follows isn't just a heated exchange. It comes across as a real-time civics lesson. It shows what happens when someone with a strong constitutional perspective challenges actions they see as overreach. At the center of it is Sally Yates, whose decisions are being questioned. The argument raised is that personal judgment shouldn't override established law or constitutional limits, especially for unelected officials. Kennedy leans into his legal background, pressing the issue and challenging what he views as an overstep in authority. The exchange unfolds as a pointed breakdown of that argument, with each question testing the boundaries of power and responsibility. In the end, it highlights a broader debate about the limits of authority in government, who gets to interpret the law, and how far that power should go. It's framed as a clear example of accountability in action, where actions are scrutinized and defended in the public eye. Stick around for the rest of the breakdown, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Let's continue.
Ms. Yates, I want to start with you. You declined to support, to defend President Trump's executive order because you thought it was unconstitutional. Is that correct?
that's correct, yes.
Okay. And you believe that no reasonable argument could be made in its defense. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that I would put it in that way, Senator. This was the analysis that we went through.
Okay. Let me stop you because I've got a whole bunch of questions.
Okay.
I just want to understand your thinking from my perspective.
Sure.
Did you believe then that there were reasonable arguments that could be made in its defense?
I believed that any argument that we would have to make in its defense would not be grounded in the truth. Because to make an argument in its defense, we would have to argue that the executive order had nothing to do with religion, that it was not done with an intent to discriminate against Muslims.
Okay.
And
So
based on a variety of factors.
You were looking at intent?
Yes, and I believe that that's the appropriate analysis. And in fact, that's been borne out in several court decisions since that time, that that's the appropriate analysis when you're doing a constitutional analysis. It's to look to see what are you trying to accomplish here.
Okay. Suppose instead of an executive order, this had been an act of Congress, would you have refused to defend it?
If it were the same act, yes. And in fact, the Department of Justice has done that in the past. For example, with DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, when the Department of Justice refused to defend DOMA.
But that was a political decision, was it not?
Well, I wasn't at Main Justice at that time, so I can't speak to that, but that was another example of when DOJ did not defend the constitutionality of a statute in that sense.
But in your opinion, the executive order is unconstitutional?
I certainly was not convinced that it was constitutional, and given that I wasn't, and the import of this, I couldn't in good conscience send Department of Justice lawyers in to defend it.
Well, I want to be sure I understand. Do you believe it's constitutional or unconstitutional?
I was not convinced that it was constitutional. I believed that it was unconstitutional in the sense that there was no way in the world I could send folks in there to argue something that we didn't believe to be the truth.
So you believe it's unconstitutional?
Yes.
Okay. I don't mean to wax too metaphysical.
And if I can say, I can understand why you might be a little frustrated with the language here.
I'm not frustrated. I'm happy as a clam.
No, and here's Here's the reason. Let me give you a little idea of the timing
Okay, but
of
let
this.
me stop you because I don't have much time. I got a lot of ground to cover.
Okay.
I don't mean to wax too metaphysical here, but at what point does an act of Congress or an executive order become unconstitutional?
Well, it all depends on what the act does.
No, but I mean, at what point is it become? I can look at a statute and say, I think that's unconstitutional. Does that make it unconstitutional?
I think the issue that we faced at the Department of Justice is to defend this executive order would require lawyers to go in and argue that this has nothing to do with religion.
But at what point does a statute or an executive order become unconstitutional? Is it some a priori determination? It becomes, I mean, what I'm telling you what I'm getting at, and I don't mean any disrespect. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
I was
mean,
appointed.
that determined, isn't it a court of final jurisdiction decides what's constitutional and not? In fact, aren't most acts of Congress presumed to be constitutional?
They are presumed, but they're not always constitutional. And no, of course, I was not on the Supreme Court. And I can tell you, Senator, look, we really wrestled over this decision. I personally wrestled over this decision. And it was not one that I took lightly at all. But it was because I took my responsibility seriously as acting Attorney General.
I believe you believe what you're saying.
Yes, I do.
I'm just trying to understand this is likely to come up in the future.
Well,
At what point does an executive order or statute become unconstitutional? When I think it's unconstitutional, or you think it's unconstitutional, or a court of final jurisdiction says it's unconstitutional?
I believe that it is the responsibility of the Attorney General. If the President asks him or her to do something that he or she believes is unlawful or unconstitutional, to say no. And that's what I did.
Okay, I get it. All right, let me ask you both a couple of questions. Can we agree, Director and Counselor, that the Russians attempted to influence the outcome of the election?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Yes.
Do you believe that the Russians did, in fact, influence the outcome of the election, Director?
In our intelligence community assessment, we made the point that we could not make that call. The intelligence community has neither the authority, the expertise, or the resources to make that judgment. The only thing we said was we saw no evidence of influencing voter tallies in any of the 50 states. But we were not in a position to judge what actual outcome on the election.
How about you, Ms. Yates?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that's part of the problem is we'll never know.
Okay. Have you ever heard, the Russians have been doing this for years, have they not? I'm not minimizing what they did. I think they did try to influence the election.
It's absolutely true. And as I pointed out, as I mentioned in my opening statement, sir, they've been doing this since at least the 60s.
Okay.
The difference, however, was this is unprecedented in terms of its aggressiveness and the multifaceted campaign that they mounted. That's new.
Isn't it a fact that in 1968, the Kremlin, actually Service A, which was part of the AGB, attempted to subsidize the campaign of Hubert Humphrey?
I don't know the specifics of that. I didn't want to research that, but again, that certainly comports with what the Russian tactics would be.
Okay. Isn't it a fact that in 1984, the Kremlin tried to stop Ronald Reagan from being reelected?
Again, I'd have to do some research to verify that, but again, it certainly comports with what, if they chose a candidate they, for whatever reason they had an aversion to, they would do that.
Okay. General Clapper, have you ever leaked information, classified or unclassified, to a member of the press?
Not wittingly or knowingly, as I said in my statement.
Classified or unclassified?
Well, unclassified is not leaking. Unclassified, that's somewhat of a somewhat of a non sequitur.
Have you ever given information to a reporter that you didn't want to have your name connected with, but you wanted to see it in the paper?
I have not. I've had many encounters with media over my career.
I'm sorry about that. How about you, Ms. Yates?
Now, other than situations where the Department of Justice would arrange, for example, for me to talk on background with reporters about a particular issue, to educate them about that. No, I've certainly never provided classified information, and that would be the only kind of background information.
Do you
And
know?
I've done the same thing, but certainly not, that doesn't include sharing classified information.
Do you know anybody else, a justice, who has ever leaked classified or unclassified information to the press?
No.
Ms. Yates?
No.
Okay.
Man, every single time it lands perfectly. Let's break this down because the setup is just as strong as the punchline. Notice how he starts. Calm, composed, no yelling or table pounding, just a steady prosecutor-style delivery focused on facts. He asks a simple question. Did you refuse to defend the president's order? Sally Yates answers confidently. Yes, Senator, clearly believing she's taking a principled stand. But that confidence walks her straight into the trap. She continues explaining her reasoning, talking about analysis, intent, and how she couldn't, in good conscience, defend something she believed was wrong. The problem, raised here, is who gets to make that call? That's where the tension builds. Even when John Kennedy tries to narrow it down, she keeps expanding, leaning into her justification. Then comes the key moment. Kennedy shifts to the core issue. When does a law become unconstitutional? When an unelected official believes it is, or when the courts say so? That question cuts straight to the heart of the matter. When she struggles to give a direct answer, he follows up with the line that defines the exchange. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court? That's not just a sharp remark. It sums up the entire argument. It highlights the idea of separation of powers. The executive enforces laws, while the judiciary determines constitutionality. The point being made is that no single official can assume both roles. And he doesn't stop there. He pivots quickly to another topic, foreign election interference. When asked whether there was interference, she agrees, but when pressed on whether it actually changed the outcome, she acknowledges there's no evidence of that. In a short span, Kennedy draws out two major points: the limits of an official's authority in interpreting the law, and the distinction between interference and outcome in election discussions. The overall takeaway is a contrast in approach. One side focused on legal boundaries and direct questioning, the other on broader justification. It turns the exchange into more than just a debate. It becomes a discussion about how power is exercised and where its limits lie. What do you think? Did that line of questioning land effectively, or do you see it differently?